Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. All parents want their children to have a quality education. Usually, that begins in elementary school, where the building blocks of knowledge are established. Now, we've all heard the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, as a former educator, I can tell you that it takes a community to educate a child. Neighborhood schools and parents need to have a strong partnership in order for the school to succeed in its ultimate mission, which is to educate students and help them blossom. 2 years ago, this kind of partnership at one East Nashville school, Warner Elementary Arts Magnet, was non-existent. But just a mile away, a partnership like this was thriving at another elementary school. WPLN reporter Meribah Knight noticed this difference and made it the focus of WPLN's podcast, The Promise. She joins me now to talk about the podcast's impact and check in on Warner 2 years later. Meribah, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you
This
for
is
having
Nashville.
me. I'm so excited to be here 2 years after this big project.
Really happy to have you here with us. So, about an hour ago, MNPS, announced their reward schools, and Warner made the list. Yeah. Tell us, what does this mean for Warner?
Oh, it's so exciting. They have been working towards getting off the priority list for a couple of years now. When I started reporting on them in 2019, they were one of the lowest performing schools in the entire state of Tennessee. They were in the bottom 5%. They were struggling with enrollment. They were struggling with test scores. They had just a few students, like 3 students proficient in math and 6 students proficient in language arts and what they call they were just so few kids that were succeeding on paper, according to the state. And they were working hard to turn this around, and I wanted to follow that journey. And so to see them now, 2 years later, be able to be a reward school, which means they've had such growth. They are on this trajectory that only a few percentage, 5% of the top schools in the state have. So it means that there's a whole bunch of stuff that went into this metric, and Principal Gibbs can talk about that. But really, it's that they are just shooting for the stars, and they're headed that way. Like, they are improving their scores. They have upped their enrollment. They are one of the top schools in Tennessee.
We're going to have Principal Ricki Gibbs on the show later on this hour. But, how unlikely is it that a school can make such a quick 180-degree turnaround in 2 years?
I mean, it's really unusual. Like, we've had this happen with Napier Elementary. That's a wonderful example of a school that turned around from priority status to reward status. It took them about 3 years. But the thing about Warner that's so special and spectacular is, let's remember what was thrown into the middle of this: COVID. I went in there 2019, 2020 school year thinking I was going to document a typical 9-month school year, although not typical because they were striving to get off this priority list and to be this top performing school that nobody thought they could be. And right in the middle of that, we had the biggest upset in public education we've ever seen in our lifetime. And they had to work through that. They had to work through kids not having access to computers and internet and not coming to school. And so that's unbelievable that they have managed to execute the goal that they set out to execute in a really short amount of time and do it with the disruption of COVID-19. That is just amazing.
Okay, so Warner is a big focus of season 2 of WPLN's podcast, The Promise, which you hosted and produced. At the time, Warner's student body was almost entirely African American, and it was failing. But then about a mile away, there's Lockeland Elementary School, which was almost entirely white students, and it was known as a great school. Tell me, how did this first catch your attention?
Well, I had been doing a lot of reporting in KC Homes, which is the public housing complex that Warner serves. And I had noticed where kids went to school. And then I had also, into my reporting, heard about a movement of parents, white parents at Lockeland Elementary, that were upset with the fact that the school had been really struggling to recruit and retain students of color. And it just struck me as, this is in essence the story of this country. There are two realities for people and families and children, and there are two sets of systems. And while all of the children at Lockeland were zoned to Warner if they lived in that priority zone, they weren't going there. Right. And while all the students who go to Warner could be in the priority zone for Lockeland, they weren't going there. So it was really a fundamental question of why is this happening? And what does this, reveal about our country, our city, and our education system?
In the podcast, you talk with Brandy Fenderson, and she's white, and her daughter Ella is biracial with a black father. Let's listen to her talk about this divide.
So her kindergarten year, there were Ella and one other child of color in the class of 20 students, so 2 out of 20. And then in the next school year, she was the only one in her classroom of color.
Brandy happened to work with a lot of kids from Warner at a literacy nonprofit she managed in the neighborhood. And what she saw in her daily commute from Lockeland to Warner left her troubled.
It just felt disturbing to me. We would drive 1 mile down Woodland Street to my work from her school, and we would go from a world of white children to a world of black children, 1 mile apart, but not attending the same school.
And then things got a little intense with Lockeland parents, right?
Yeah. I mean, they, I think we've seen a lot of this when we talk about, I'll be bold, white fragility, centering whiteness, hoarding resources. I think a lot of white progressive families don't want to see themselves as the problem. And in this case, they were taking resources and they were keeping them in one place. And there were almost no students of color that were being served by those resources. Lockeland was one of the best schools in the state, in the country. It had been a blue ribbon school. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, surely we can be better than this.
Season 2 of The Promise begins with the fallout from the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education ruling that desegregated schools across the country, something that city officials and white parents in Nashville strongly resisted. Why did you decide to start there?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that, because this story is all about history. History is so critical to understanding where we've come from and why we're here. And I noticed that there was really general amnesia around the story of desegregation in Nashville, at least among the white people and the city's leadership. I don't think they could really tell, the story of public education and admit to the fact that white families had resisted this and that the city at large had resisted this. And I didn't feel like I could tell the story without first laying the groundwork of history and how revisionist we've been around it and how mightily black families fought for equity, just as the city and the racist white people here did everything possible to push back. I just felt we can't understand where we're at unless I thoroughly, over 2 episodes, methodically lay out just how hard it was to get to where we were.
Can you break down briefly how schools were desegregated, but then through these moves from city officials and parents, they were resegregated?
Yeah. So, Brown versus Board of Education, the decision came down in 1954. The city just drug its feet, and it wasn't until A.Z. Kelly filed a lawsuit with his son, Robert Kelly, and a number of other plaintiffs that said, we want to desegregate these schools. That was in 1955. They still didn't. In 1957, they finally decided we will do this one grade at a time. That meant it was going to happen so slowly that, Kelly's son, Robert, would never actually see a desegregated school. Mm-hmm. And so they just went into this kicking and screaming, and white families responded in kind. They fled the system. They went to the outskirts where, these desegregation policies didn't extend for a period of time. They, a lot of the private schools that we have in this city, look back at when they started. Mm-hmm. They all came in the wave of desegregation. White families wanted to pay more than they wanted to integrate. They would have paid for their kid to get an education if it meant they didn't have to go to school with Black children. And so this was just, the lawsuit lasted 43 years. That should tell you how long it took this city.
It's a very long time.
Yeah.
In 2017, MNPS received a considerable amount of money in a federal grant. Can you explain what that grant is and how it applies to Warner?
Yeah, so Warner got this magnet grant. It's essentially, magnet grants are really the only mechanism the federal government has to desegregate schools right now. Basically, they flood a segregated school, which they like to sanitize with the language subgroup isolation instead of segregated.
Okay.
But that's what it is. They flood it with money for a finite amount of time, and they try to boost its programming so that white families will come. This is the more appealing scenario than busing. People have already, said what they have to say about busing. It is not a popular thing for many families. But the thing that I found so frustrating about this grant in general was just how much it centered whiteness as a solution for the problem. But the numbers show that the more integrated our schools are, the better everybody does. So schools need to be diverse. And while busing doesn't work, the other thing the federal government has to offer is money to create a school that can hopefully recruit those white families that are missing from it.
Okay. Now, in season 2 of The Promise, you talk with a teacher at Warner, Miss Angela Moore, who's been there for more than 30 years. Long time. She told you that there was something that just didn't sit right with her about this money coming in. Let's listen.
Are you investing in these kids, or are you investing in the kids to come? We have a wonderful Fuse lab. It's a science lab, brand spanking new.
She points down the hall toward the new lab filled with 3D printers and computers. There's also a brand new dance studio, like the real deal, with a sprung floor and walls of mirrors. No other school in the district has one. It's all thanks to the federal magnet money.
Are we selling it to these kids, the kids that are here now? Or are we selling it to the parents that are coming in that we want to recruit their child to be here?
What did you think of her question? Even with all that's improved at the school, does it still feel relevant?
Yeah, absolutely. You do have to ask that question. Who are we serving? The thing that I want to highlight about this moment of it getting this reward status is that this is such a victory for Warner because not only did they work really hard, they did it with the support and resources, but they did it. They started to do it before any new white families came into that school. And I think it proves that what you need to do is support and fund public education. Now, they have lots of new white students. It's amazing. Their enrollment has doubled. But they were on track with this rapid improvement that year that I went in to report on it. They started to hit the ball out of the park. And obviously, COVID intercepted that, so we couldn't get the numbers. But they were doing all of it before white students ever walked in the door. So I think that says something about how you invest and who you invest in.
Meribah Knight is a senior reporter at WPLN. She hosted and produced the Peabody Award-winning season 2 of the impactful podcast, The Promise Meribah. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Khalil.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, we will invite a few parents, to join the conversation and to talk about their experiences of Warner and Lockeland elementary schools. Do you have a child who is past or is a past or present student of Warner? Tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. 2 years ago, Warner Elementary Art Magnet School was one of the lowest performing schools in the state of Tennessee, in the bottom 5%. It was also extremely under-enrolled, but the school hired a new principal and using federal grant money started on an ambitious plan to turn things around. Last hour, Metro Nashville Public Schools announced this year's reward schools. Those are the schools on the opposite end of that spectrum, and Warner Elementary was one.
I'm here at Amqui Elementary School in the school library where we just finished up a press conference. 48 schools, that's the highest number ever, are now designated as reward schools, which means that they are high achieving, and fewer schools than the last time are on the priority school designation, which indicates that they were struggling. 2 of the schools that are now known as reward schools were previously in that struggling category. One of them is Warner Arts Magnet. They went from that struggling designation just a few years ago to now being some of the top in the district. So really impressive. One of the other principals here from Amqui, which also went from priority to reward, said that a big component of that change was the ability to reduce the number of disciplinary issues that took students out of the classroom.
That was WPLN's Alexis Marshall on the scene of that press conference. As she mentioned, that's good news for the 48 schools, and especially the tremendous turnaround for Warner. Joining me now to talk about what this means for parents of kids at Warner is Erin Mock, who has a kindergartner and a second grader there. Erin, welcome to This is Nashville.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure to have you with us. Now, tell me, when you made the decision to send your kids to Warner, it was still struggling. What went into that choice?
A few things. We knew when we were looking at schools, our priority wasn't necessarily test scores or school ratings. We knew that we wanted our children to be in a school that looked like the neighborhood they grew up in. It reflected the city they're growing up in, the country. And then we also knew that we really, really wanted our children to, we were hoping for Black educators, which was a big part for us in choosing a school for our children. We wanted them to see Black people in positions of power and in positions of leadership. And so, Warner kind of ticked those boxes. And on top of it, I have to say, I talked to my friend Heather. One of her kiddos was at Warner, and she said, she's so happy there. She's so cared for and loved there. And that was huge to us. We wanted our children to not just get an education, but to be loved and appreciated.
Mm-hmm. How did people in the community, your neighbors, how did they respond to your decision?
I would say a lot of fellow white parents were shocked. They kind of felt like there were only 2 school options for us to send our kiddos to as white kiddos. And I mean, I even remember when we were first buying in East Nashville, I had a coworker at the time say, "Oh, you're buying in East Nashville, you must not want to have kids." And I was like, "What does that mean?" "Yes, we'd like to have children." And she was like, "Oh, you can't send your kids to schools in East Nashville." And I was like, "No, what you're saying is you don't think I should I can send white kids to school in East Nashville." And that really was just like, that was even before I had children. Like, that was so shocking to me. So there was just a lot of, even when I went to the enrollment center to start the process of registering my son Truman, I walked in and she said, the enrollment center person said, "Oh, are you here for Lockeland?" And I was like, "Wow, no, I'm here for Warner." Yeah. So
what do you think is their motivation behind such comments?
A lot. Meribah said it before. I think you can be a very progressive person and a progressive voter and have a Black Lives Matter sign on your front lawn and still not really follow through with those ideals. I think there's this perception among white parents, regardless of their politics, of like, our children deserve cushion and comfort, and they can't feel discomfort. We can't let them feel discomfort. That's on the other kids. And I don't think they want to admit that. I don't think that they, maybe they don't even cognitively understand, like, that's what they're doing. But I think it stems from that big time. It's just that, oh, my kiddos can't feel uncomfortable. What if they feel uncomfortable being one of the only white kids? And it's like, well, what about traditionally the Black kiddos who have been the only Black kids? Like, I just don't think that they think that whole process through.
So you're getting all these comments.
Yes.
Getting these opinions.
Mm-hmm.
What was your response to all of that?
Well, I will say, so if they came at me from the angle of, well, have you seen the scores? It's blah, blah, I would just say, hey, listen, my kiddos, they have a mom. They're going to get an education no matter what, right? They're going to learn to read and write. They're going to learn to do mathematics. They have a mom and dad who drag them to museums and make them read books, and right? So I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is my 2 white sons growing up with a horrendous sense of entitlement. And so if my kiddo has to sit in a kindergarten, first grade, whatever classroom, and he has to have patience with a child of color who's perhaps moved here from another country and English isn't their first language, and my son can show them grace and can show them patience, that's the education that's what I want for them. And so I would come at it from that angle. So I'm not worried necessarily about, stats, if you will. And then the other thing was I would just kind of challenge them. Why wouldn't he be able to go at Warner? Why would you think he wouldn't be safe at Warner? What's your concerns? And I think when you kind of present it that way, what do you think's going to happen to him, right? There would kind of be this shock of they didn't really have an answer. And so, and that's the approach I think we've continued to take.
I'd like to bring in our next guest. Willie Sims is a father who spent time at Warner as a substitute teacher and had an older daughter who attended the school years ago. He currently has a 4th grader at Lockeland Elementary. Willie, thanks so much for being with us.
How you doing, Khalil?
I'm doing all right, my man. How about you?
Man, I'm doing good, man.
Fantastic. Now, your youngest child has been at Lockeland since kindergarten. Did you ever consider sending her to Warner?
Not at all. Not even for a second. Until, and she's actually 5th grade now, so she's out of Lockeland.
Okay.
But until she was about in 3rd grade, and I went over to Warner, I was like, oh, snap. They got magic going on over here. If she wasn't already at Lockeland, if that was her kindergarten year, she would have been going to Warner.
You would have made the switch.
For sure.
What was that motivation behind that idea?
I went and worked at Warner one day, and I remember being in them hallways when it was dangerous grounds for them couple years when they switched the principals and made it go crazy. It was a good school. They switched the principals up, the good old gentrified switch, and then it got terrible. And then when I went back years later, I had never seen nothing like it. I went and found the principal. I found Ricki Gibbs and was like, hey, man, what is you doing over here? I never ever seen that big of a switch in the same kids. So some of the same kids who maybe have been in kindergarten when I was there, maybe it was 4th grade then. I was blown away.
Now, your daughter was the only black child in her kindergarten class at Lockeland, right?
Kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, they got another black kid. But, yep.
Did that shock you?
It did the first time I realized that's what was going on. And then, like I said on the podcast, I remember Heather came to me okay, we about to do this and, try to make a switch, make something happen. And I was like, I'm not getting involved in that. I'm not about to put my blackness all up in the mix and make it even weirder for my daughter being the only black kid. But Heather was so real. She was so real. And I was like, okay. Well, that was before I realized she was the only black kid in the 1st grade at that time. And once I realized she was the only black kid, I was like, dang, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get down with them. But really, it's still a white problem. You know what I'm saying? What's going on in Lockeland? That's white people got to fix that. Black people can't fix this.
Now, you mentioned that you didn't want to put added pressure on your daughter since she was the only African-American child in this class. And it's kind of, speaking a little bit to what Erin was saying about, white kids having to be able to feel uncomfortable and being different and in the one, being, in a different group, so to speak.
Yeah.
How did your daughter reflect upon that?
Man, she told me some wild stories over the times, just things that kids might have said or that was told to her. I think she's good. When Heather was saying, she was one of the kids to have more diversity. And in my mind, I'm like, y'all are my diversity. We super black at home. She got black family, black friends. She get a lot of blackness. Y'all are whiteness. You know what I'm saying? So we cool. But yeah, I heard some interesting stories. She told me some crazy things that I bet parents wouldn't know that their kids was saying. We never even did nothing with it. We just told her how to deal with it and, let America be America.
Now, when you were substituting at Warner, first tell me what sparked your interest in doing that, and then what did you discover and learn from that experience?
What sparked my interest, I was in New York trying to move my family up there, and my daughter had got switched from, she went to Ross Elementary in 3rd grade, which is now a pre-K, and they made all the kids go to a different elementary school. And she was the only one that ended up going to Warner. It was a cool school. It was cool. The principal over there, it wasn't the best school ever, but it wasn't a bad school. Then, during that year, 3rd, 4th grade year, I'm talking to her, and her grades are slipping, and I'm thinking she tripping, And I come back, man, I go up in that school, man, it was like dangerous grounds. Kids slamming doors, skipping class, elementary kids. Picture dangerous ground with elementary kids.
Wow. You mean that Michelle Pfeiffer movie?
For sure.
Dangerous
Coolio.
Minds. Yeah, okay.
Okay, all of them.
Yeah.
All of them. Dangerous Minds, Lean on Me. It was wild before Joe Clark.
Okay.
Ricki Gibbs is like the real life Joe Clark because it was going crazy. But these kids were decent the year before. It was just a switch up of this principal and whatever they was doing to... the school is a beautiful school, beautiful location. At some point, it will be gentrified. It's happening. You know what I'm saying? And them kids in Casey can't be there forever. They about to expand the Titan Stadium. That real estate worth more than the people on it in the minds of the place. So it's a lot of moving parts to the whole thing. And it was buck wild. But then I seen what Ricki Gibbs did, and I got a new appreciation for administrators.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekulona. We're talking this hour about Season 2 of The Promise with parents whose children are currently students at both Warner Elementary School and a former student at Lockeland Elementary, which is featured in the podcast. Now, Erin, so you decided to send your kids over to Warner, even though some members of the community suggested that it was a poorly performing school. You should find somewhere else. Now, here we stand 2 years later. Warner has made a tremendous turnaround. How do you feel about your decision?
We love our decision. Our kids are thriving. They love it. We are just so thankful that we found Warner. And I partially want to say, I think partially why they are thriving isn't just that it's a fantastic education and they're wonderful educators at Warner, because Dr. Gibbs and his staff do an outstanding job. But I think they also support and love those kids emotionally. I think they just think of everybody's kind of needs and say, what is, if we want our children to do well on a spelling test, how do we have to support them like emotionally too? And so they're just so loved and comfortable. And we're so thankful that we're at Warner.
It's interesting to me because it's like parents have to self-desegregate the schools, it seems like.
Yes, and I would like to, yes, I, like you, have started volunteering at Warner. I've also taken on like a kiddo through virtual tutoring. And what I wish thoroughly, it's like, when I'm going to use Lockeland Springs as the example, just because we've been talking about it. But if you're a middle-class privileged white woman like me who gets to stay home, then you need to spend your time, or just, just mean a little teeny bit of your time volunteering at our public schools. And not just the one that supports your kids, okay? Like, there's enough of us that can cover metro schools, both right in your community and a little bit outside of. And if the problem, I think, with a school like Lockeland is you had all of the moms like me with all of our time and attention, right? And they could just hive mind and swoop into this school. So the school, not only is the staff there, but now they have this really amazing, community of moms and dads who can just like rush in. And it's like, you need to spread that out. You need to take that to other schools. And it's like you said, like, segregation and racism, it's not a black people problem. It's a white people problem. That's not us. So you need to go spend an hour out of your time. And I know we're all tired because we're like parents, but you need to go spend an hour of your time at a school that doesn't just benefit your child. And I don't know, that's my soapbox.
Willie, how do you respond to Erin's soapbox?
That's real. I agree with it completely. It's just really interesting when my oldest daughter was going to Warner. Excuse me, y'all. When my oldest daughter was going to Warner, there was not a PTO. We started a dad's group, and there was about 6 of us just trying because there is nobody staying at home. Somebody got to go to work. It might be one parent. It's a lot of situations. I remember coming to school some days and teachers would be in there crying because some of the kids going through some stuff, but it was set out day, the day that they found out such and such them was getting kicked out of Casey, and this is their family. So the kids dealing with this, they learning that morning, but they got to come to school. They dealing, man, them kids at Warner have been through more tragic real events than all the teachers at Lockeland put together. 10 kids, I bet, at Warner have been through more real life, tragic, for real things than all of the teachers and parents put together. And it's just interesting. It's no understanding. You know what I'm saying? And I love Lockeland. You know what I'm saying? Lockeland was a great school. You know what I'm saying? Make sure I put that on the record. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Principal Lewis doing her thing. Them teachers care about them kids. It's a beautiful situation, but they got the super support system.
I understand what you're saying. When I was a teacher in the past, I worked at a school in Los Angeles for kids who got kicked out of high school. I grew up in the suburbs of Baltimore. Didn't grow up rich by any means, but here I am educating 14-year-olds who had lives generations deep in gangs and other things. It gave me an understanding, and I realized here I was at 30-some years old, and I hadn't been through a quarter of what these 14, 15-year-olds had been through. It gave me a lot of understanding and an increased amount of patience and empathy for them, and that's what I tried to give. Now, saying that, you know, we set examples for children. That's one thing. Getting adults to take action is another. Erin, I'm curious, what do you think of the impact of the podcast?
I mean, I think it did make a lot of parents reflect on, hey, are we aligning what we say are our values, and are we showing that to our community? You know, I really think it had that moment of, well, why wouldn't I send my child to a majority black school? I need to question what that is within me that kind of throws my hands up and go, oh gosh, I don't know about that. Well, what is that? And I really do think that the impact of the podcast, I hope, made some people kind of reevaluate what they say they believe in and then their actions.
Willie, what's the impact real quick?
Real quick, I think that, I don't know, I'm not sure about the impact of the podcast, but I know a lot of people, it touched a lot of people. It made them think. But I always question, like, you got to show me, you know what I'm saying, the good quality East Nashville liberal white people. You know, I love them, see them in 5 Points, getting pizza, all of that. But when it comes down to people's kids, you get to see what really matters. It's different what you say and the sign you put up and then what you do with your kids, because everybody want their kids to have the best. So we going to see, man. We going to see what's going on.
That is Willie Sims. He has 2 of his children attended Lockeland Elementary and Warner Elementary Arts Magnet School. He was joined by Erin Mock, who is the mother of 2 students at Warner Elementary Arts Magnet School. Thanks to you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Love you, man.
Love you too. We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll meet the principal behind the dramatic turnaround at Warner Arts Magnet School and a parent who helped form a community of support. Did you attend Warner Elementary Arts Magnet School? What was it like when you were in school? Tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville.
He's singing.
Every time.
What do you mean every time?
Every time we do morning meetings, this is what he does. He gets up there and sings and dances with them. It's every time.
We're back at Warner Elementary. It's a Friday assembly in the spring of 2019. A very different time, I know. Kids are filing into the school auditorium. Some sit cross-legged on the floor, bopping their heads and singing to the music, talking with their friends. As they settle in, the school's principal, Ricki Gibbs, lip syncs and dances. He does the lean back, the shoulder bounce, the whip. He flashes a smile. The kids love it. There is so much energy in this room, but it also feels cavernous. The 30-foot ceilings, the massive stage, they seem to swallow this tiny school. Such a big space and so few kids. Thankfully, though, it doesn't sound empty. Not at all.
Good afternoon, boys and girls.
Warner is working mightily to up its enrollment. It's in the midst of a huge push coupled with a surge in resources to try to recruit new families to come here. Specifically, new white families. I'm serious. This is explicitly stated in the federal grant Warner is getting for all this, because the school has become so isolated with Black children that in the eyes of the feds and the policy wonks, it needs these white kids to balance it out, to desegregate it. But the perception for most white families here has been that Warner is one, if not the least desirable schools in the neighborhood. Go to greatschools.com and you'll see why. Warner has a, quote, very concerning rating and a 1 out of a possible 10 on its test scores. This school is far below the state average, it reads. This suggests that students at this school are likely not performing at grade level. So most white parents shopping around for a school will read that and run the other direction. Or worse.
There you go.
Miss Bain, a first grade teacher, has taught at Warner for 23 years, and she's heard some things from folks in the neighborhood.
You know, I've had instances on the playground with neighborhood people where kids are zoned for there. I will never send my kids to that school. Point blank to your face. And
knowing you're a teacher here?
Yes. And saying it on the playground to me in front of kids. I've had that happen numerous times in East Nashville.
That was from season 2 of the WPLN podcast, The Promise. And in 2019 was definitely a different time in a lot of ways. Joining me now to talk about how Warner got from there to today is the singing principal himself, Ricki Gibbs. Now, look, I know you hustled all the way from that press conference, so thank you so much for being here. Welcome to This is Nashville.
No problem. My pleasure. Excited to be here.
Really happy to have you. So first off, how you feeling today?
You know, I've been asked that question a couple times. Proud. I think that's the biggest one. I went through the excitement and hey, this is really happening, but it's really a culmination of a lot of work and a lot of energy that's been put together from a lot of people. And I'm proud to say that most people will say, well, you've led the work. I genuinely see it as I've had the honor of being a part of what has been a life-changing process for not only our scholars, but the educators as well as the whole East Nashville community.
And it's interesting you say that because I want to, give people an understanding of the relationship between a school and its community. What were things like when you first started at Warner?
We were disconnected. We were a school that had 170 students. It was a school that had a lot of discipline. And it had isolated itself from the entire community. I oftentimes tell educators that our work need to be dispelling what I call the biggest lie ever told in education. In education, we get all of our new teachers and we say, if you want to change a child's life, don't worry about what happens outside your four walls. Only worry about what you're doing in your classroom because that's all you can control. And I think the school embodied that and believed that. And when I got there and I told the team, poverty doesn't stop at our door. Hunger doesn't stop at our door. Anger, depression, anxiety, none of those things stop at our door. So by cutting off the community, we're cutting off some of our greatest supporters into really transforming our children's lives. So when we talked about educating our scholars, it was about educating the whole scholar. Yes, we're going to ensure that you get the academic outcomes when you're at school, but let's also talk about how the community can support us. Let's talk about how we're going to support you and your parents at home, because ultimately we wanted to make sure that we really put those wraparound services in place to ensure that our scholars were successful, not only at Warner, but when they leave us as well.
Did you have a difficult time getting parents involved when you took that approach?
You know, the exciting part was it wasn't that hard. And this is my challenge. This is my task to educators. It's only difficult to get parents involved when parents genuinely see you don't really care about their child, that you're just there. When parents saw that I legitimately had a deep invested interest in seeing their children succeed, they were ready to support me, but it took me reaching out. Oftentimes as school leaders, we wait and say, well, parents don't show up. I took on the approach, if you don't come to me, as the young people say, I'm going to pull up. I'm going to come to you. So I'm going to come to you and figure out what we need to do to ensure that we can work together. Because ultimately, me and my team were uniquely qualified in instruction and pedagogy. We understand that our families are uniquely qualified to genuinely understand their children. So when we take our knowledge of education, their knowledge of their babies, we put that together, we made magic through the power of a great education.
My next guest is Heather Wood. She was featured in The Promise and currently has a kindergartner at Warner. Heather, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi.
Now, you already had a child at Lockeland. Why did you choose to send your youngest to Warner instead?
Okay, so my youngest is in kindergarten. The one I sent to Warner is now in third grade.
Okay.
And then I have one who is still at Lockeland in fifth grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
3. So why choose to send one of your kids to
Yeah,
Warner?
so when my son was at Ross for pre-K, Nia, Will's daughter, was one of his best friends in pre-K. And I kind of did, the talking to all the parents, where's your kid going to kindergarten? And he and a few other Warner parents said, Warner used to be a great school. There was a time when it was a great school. It's not a great school right now. We're not sending our youngest there, or we're passing on it, or whatever. So we didn't send Oscar. We sent him to Lockeland, and Nia too. And then Marion went to Ross as well, like 2 years later. And like Oscar, it was a very integrated class. Maybe, I don't know, she was in the minority, but she didn't have that many white friends in her class. She had some, but it would have been a real weird shock to her system, I think, to go from her classroom at Ross to Lockeland, just like it had been for Oscar, because Oscar and Nia, it took them 1 week to be like, it's all pink people. Where are all the rest of them? Mm-hmm. We didn't want to do that again. So Lockeland, we live down the street, but Warner is our zone school. And so I thought it's time I toured it, because I didn't even tour it the first time. I just went on what everybody told me. And so when I toured it, it was really quiet. It was just really quiet. It was, it's not like you saw something bad there. It's what you didn't see there. Just there weren't enough kids, Mm-hmm. And, you could tell that some of the teachers were good teachers who really wanted to be there, who were teaching. And then some, you could tell that they just couldn't get a job at other places. But Oscar had some friends from Ross who were there. And I saw them and I just thought, I don't want to send my kid to a school that's not functioning, but on the other hand, this school's not going to function super well if everybody who has the option keeps walking past it.
So how is your son doing at Warner now?
My daughter, who's in third grade.
Yeah, your daughter.
Yeah.
How's she doing?
Good, great. I mean, she's only ever been there, so
yeah,
it's her whole life, her whole social life is there. And
I understand you volunteered at Warner, right?
For a short time before she went there, I volunteered. we actually, we enrolled her before Dr. Gibbs got there. I think the one thing that the podcast people didn't understand was that they thought that we kind of like met Dr. Gibbs and sort of like followed him off into the sunset. Like this is this visionary, nationally renowned principal. And of course, like at that point, it wouldn't have been a big, hard choice, right? Because the second he walked in, I was like, I don't even need to worry about this anymore. But before that, he wasn't there. And we decided to do it anyway. And when he got there, you look at him and you're like, no baby is going to be left behind, and all the babies are going to learn all the things. So I volunteered there, a little bit, but Marion was in kindergarten when COVID shut the schools down. So I really was only there for a short time.
Now, Principal Gibbs, let's talk a little bit about your plan. I want to play you a little bit of tape from the podcast.
Okay.
It's from the last episode when everything had been upended.
Yeah.
It was April 2020. A tornado had torn through the city and the neighborhood. Yeah. COVID-19 had shuttered schools. Budgets were being slashed. Warner lost about $200,000 from its budget, which laid off and put key programs like dance and mindfulness at risk. In other words, the stuff that was having a huge impact on kids and also enticing white families to enroll were kind of being lost.
Yeah.
You're speaking about this to your staff over Zoom. Let's listen.
You have to be around me when I get into a funk. Like, I don't get into funks often, but I was pissed last week. And when I get pissed, I kind of shut off from the outside world. I was at my breaking point. I was like, you know what? I'm tired of fighting for kids. Like, one person can't just consistently carry that burden on top of everything else that's going on. Because I was at a point, I was gonna say, y'all can have Warner. Like, I'm just, this is too much.
Principal Gibbs, take me back to that moment in 2020. What were you feeling?
Man, it was a dark place. Actually, even listening to it, it brings back those emotions because I knew what we were fighting for, and we were so close at that point. Like, that was a time where every predictor that we were taking academically had us blowing all of our goals out of the water. We had so much momentum, and then it was like we hit a wall, and every time I wanted to go right, somebody built another wall, and you would go left, another wall, and it was just one that I was getting into that funk, that dark space. But luckily, just like I'll try to be that person for our teachers, parents, and staff. I had other educators who were my thought partners at that time. One of our chief, she's our chief now, Renita Perry. She was one of those people that was, hey, Ricki, I need you to think of it this way, think of it that way. And when it was able to help pull me out of that space, because ultimately what I've realized, how I go, my team goes. So it was, I could stay in that space and feel sorry for me, or I feel sorry for myself, or I can figure out ways to innovate and push my team to come out of that space as well. And I think we were able to do that, which got us to a day like today where we're here celebrating some amazing news that our school community received.
Heather, what's not, with schools, not all schools have podcasts made about them, but is there anything you think folks on the outside don't understand about Warner even to this day?
I think, well, first of all, I think you have to kind of drive past it. I mean, just like a week ago, a parent friend of mine from Lockeland said, something, one of the things I hear, you're so brave for sending your, white child to a high poverty, all black school, and I was like, I wouldn't describe it that way anymore. Even when the podcast was, airing, I felt like there was a little bit of a perception that every kid at Warner lived in the Casey homes. And in Marion's kindergarten class, only one of them actually lived there. So there have always been working class people and just people who grew up around Warner going there. There's a lady on the PTO who went there herself. And now that we've been there for a few years, I know other people who grew up there and went there, and, it's been there obviously for like 100 years. So, I think it's easy to lose sight of that, the fact that there are all these layers, There were really good principals. There were principals who really struggled. There was a time where it was like an all-white school. There was a time where it was an all-black school. There was a time where the middle class Black people kind of started sending their kids to charters. I mean, it's a whole history that you would have to really talk to people like, my friend Miss Mayo, who's on the PTO, Miss Bain, in order to know that, But I would say you got to kind of walk in the door to see what it is now. And it's not Lockeland, but it's not what I think a lot of people think it is either.
We got about 30 seconds left. Principal Gibbs, how about you? What do you want people to know?
I wanted to know that the business is booming. When we started the podcast, we had 170 students. Now we're at 419. We started as a level 1 school. Now we're a level 5 Tennessee Reward School. So it's one that the community is supporting. Our families are supporting. We have amazing educators and scholars that show up and show out every day because they understand that the only way to change lives is through the power of a great education.
That is Ricki Gibbs, principal of Warner Elementary Arts Magnet School in East Nashville. He was joined by Heather Wood, mother of Warner students. Thanks again to both of you for being on the show today and to keep on up with your important work. Really appreciate it. We want to thank everyone who tuned in this hour. Tomorrow, we present A Citizen Nashville answering your questions about monkeypox. This is Nashville is a production of WPLN News and Nashville Public Radio. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producers are Steve Harush and Rose Gilbert. Our digital lead is Anna Gallegos-Cannon. Michaela Elias is our technical director. Our executive producer is Andrea Tudhope. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. The conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekalona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and be good to each other.